little breaksies with To Be Afrikan. Essays by Africans in the Process of Sankofa, Returning to Our Source of Power. And it was signed too. I was like, oh my god, her. Okay, Ma'at Inc. Incorporated, mission statement. We have joined as a collective to work to define and determine a future for African people. As African-centered scholars, educators, activists, parents, organizers, healers, students, and advocates, we are responsible for the nurturing, protection, vindication, preservation, prosperity, socialization, advancement, and empowerment of people of African ancestry. We understand that our essence, strength, and victorious destiny comes from a spiritual connection to the ancestors and those yet to be born. We recognize that we are an African people and are committed to the recreation of an independent African reality by taking control of the socialization of African people for a Pan-African world order, reestablishing the self-determination of African people, reclaiming the spirits, hearts, and minds of African youth, developing African-centered intergenerational institutions, and manifesting the indomitable, let's look that word up, something that's unable to be dominated is what I'm thinking in terms of how the word is spelled. Indomitable, yeah. Look it up. Impossible to subdue or defeat. I want to see how it's indomitable. Indomitable. Indomitable African warrior healer spirit which protects African people. Consequently, we recognize and accept our accountability to our ancestors and our responsibility for African people as the foundation for the fulfillment of this commitment. Editor's introduction. Ma'at Incorporated. Mbongi 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 Association for African Transformation is a collective of Pan-African activists, organizers, scholars who focus on the reclamation of the mind and hearts of our people so that we can be clear and committed to African transformation throughout the world. The idea for To Be Afrikan campaign was inspired by the profound statement by Nana, I call my Nana Bafor, oh Lord, Aman Kwatia. The second, and Asa Hilliard, To Be Afrikan or Not to Be. We understand this to be the essential issue of our time. Phrased as a rhetorical question, it is actually a powerful statement of clarity and identity for African people. Our choice is to either exist as part of the African family or to cease to exist altogether. We really have no choice. The events of 9/11 and the war against Iraq have sharpened the contradictions of our cultural misorientation, kambon, and cultural confusion. As the suggestion of Wade Nobles, we decide to begin the To Be Afrikan campaign, making that simple girl Safari open. What was I looking up? Oh, the Black Agenda Report. There's this website called the Black Agenda Report. Look it up if you would like to. I thought it was interesting, but it gives like black news. ADAGE. Adage. A proverb or shortened statement expressing a general truth. An old adage, out of sight, out of mind. Oh, okay. A simple adage easily accessible to all African people. It is our hope that this book will be a catalyst for African-centered resocialization and institution building, wherever our people are. It has been written collectively. Each contribution is brief. We begin generally and then move to specific manifestations of what it means to be African. The contributors are themselves committed to Pan-Africanists of various ages and areas of specialization. The objective of this book is to be practical and instructive, to offer guidelines to those who are searching for their African selves and seeking to reclaim their African minds. It is a manual for those of us who are striving to be African in an anti-African environment. All proceeds from the sales of this book are used to keep it in print and to further the work of Ma'at Incorporated. The book itself is an ongoing process, growing in size as African consciousness grows. Marimba Ani. Editor's introduction. In my music, my plays, my films, I want to carry always the central idea, to be African. Multitudes of men have died for less worthy ideals. It is even more eminently worth living for. Paul Robeson, 1934. These essays give substance to the consideration of one of the fundamental questions that have faced Africans in America since we were first forcibly brought to this hemisphere. To Be African has dealt with many of our brilliant scholars. To Be African has been dealt with by many of our most brilliant scholars / ancestors, such as Martin Delaney, Prince Hall, Edward Wilmot Lydon, Amy Jacques Garvey, or Jacques, Amy Jacques Garvey, Jacques, Henry Highland Garnett, Maria Stewart, Paul Robeson, Drusilla Donji Houston, and Dr. John Henry Clark. It has been said by many wise and learned people that the descendants of the Africans who were kidnapped and brought to the Americas, where they were enslaved and oppressed, need to realize who they are. It is amazing that so many rich and powerful people have spent so much time, money, and energy in order to keep us from realizing and understanding our Africanity. This is made more amazing when we see descriptions of us written in mainstream media like powerless minority and at risk. If we are so powerless and endangered, why are they expending so many resources to keep a self-checked people down? They apparently know something about us that we don't know. The reawakening of our African selves is essential to our survival. Although culture is a battlefield and we do indeed face terminal cultural disassociation, because of the theft and the reassignment of our culture, we also face physical extinction. A people without a culture or without a means of holding on to their culture is threatened by their elimination from the face of the earth. It means nothing if phenotypically African people continue to exist physically if they have been separated from their own identities and culture. If we look at the plight of African people on the African continent and in the diaspora trying to adapt to alien cultures and value systems, the danger of trying to be what we aren't should become more obvious. It would also seem obvious that to be African is the way back to our traditional position of moral, intellectual, political, economic, scientific, and spiritual leadership in the world. These essays do not attempt to romanticize African culture and values. Indeed, there are problems inherent in any culture. By virtue of its antiquity, spiritual and intellectual content, and learned values, African culture has been the moral and philosophical compass for the world for most of the existence of Homo sapiens. This translates into respect for the Creator and the Creator's creation. For us, to be African is critical not only for survival, but it is critical for the survival of the earth. We owe it to our ancestors. We owe it to our grandchildren's grandchildren a safe, clean, non-polluted world. We must return to ourselves. We simply have to be African. To play even a small part in the creation of this book is in honor of this editor. It is a labor of love for African people, respect for our ancestors, and appreciation for the legacy of struggle that they have left us. In the word Africa, C and K are used interchangeably according to the author's preference. Many thanks are due to Ma'at Incorporated and the contributors to this volume. Burnett Quado Galman. Our concern with the connection to our African past is really future oriented. Our concern with the connection to our African past is really future oriented. It is not merely for sentimental or aesthetic reasons that we return. While it is true that no one can or should live in the past, it is equally true that all futures are created out of some past. Nana Bafor Aman Quita II, Asa G. Hilliard III. Our own reality, however fine and attractive the reality of others may be, can only be transformed by detailed knowledge of it, by our own efforts, by our own sacrifices. Amilcar Cabral. It is it is of no use for us to wait any longer for a generation of well-educated men to arise. We have been slumbered and slept too long already. The day is far spent. The day of death approaches us, and you have sound sense and good judgment sufficient to begin with if you feel disposed to make a right use of it. Maria Stewart. To Be African by Marimba Ani. All people all over the world throughout history have shared in common the fact that they belong to a culture of origin. This is a universal reality. Another equally important universal reality is that there are many, many different cultures in the world, and each of them is unique. The uniqueness of a culture is what gives the specialness to its members. The members of a culture are bonded together by the culture which they share, the culture which gives them a sense of collective identity. We are an African people. This statement simply means that there are values, traditions, and a heritage that we share because we have a common origin. The cultural process is naturally a continuous one that allows people to affirm their connectedness through being linked to their origins. The continuity of our cultural identity have been interrupted cruelly and unnaturally by the experience of slavery. We as a people are still suffering from this crime because we have not been allowed to find our way back to the sense of cultural identity and continuity which would make us unified and whole people. We have not been able to function in a world with a collective consciousness that a strong sense of cultural roots naturally imparts. The term Mafa, from the book Let the Circle Be Unbroken, is a Kai Swahili word for disaster that we are now using to reclaim our right to tell our own story. Mafa refers to the enslavement of our people and to the sustained attempt to dehumanize us. Because the Mafa has disconnected us from our cultural origins, we have been we have remained vulnerable in a social order that does not reflect our cultural identity. We are people of African ancestry living in denial of who we are. We have lost our strength as a people. We are losing our children to systems which miseducate them. Our families are disintegrating before our eyes. Our members are growing in the statistics of drug addiction and incarceration. Responsible national Black organizations are seeking remedies to these problems, but we are not speaking with one voice. We need to work together as a family who supports its members and who is responsible for their welfare. We must use the most valuable asset that we have. That is the spirit of our people. It is that spirit that connects us to our African roots. We are slowly awakening to the need to claim our cultural legacy. We are using the term Sankofa from the Akan tradition in Ghana, West Africa, which tells us to return to the source so that we can go forward with strength and clarity. Culture is a powerful tool for inspiring human beings and bringing them together in concerted family action. Our cultural roots are the most ancient in the world. The spiritual concept of our ancestors gave birth to religious thought. African people believe in the oneness of African family through sacred time, which unites the past, the present, and the future. Our ancestors live with us. They created the first civilization thousands of years ago, and they suffered the pain of the Mafa. They were able to endure the most disastrous and dehumanizing circumstances ever to have been perpetuated against a group of people only because of the power of the African spirit. They did not have the freedom to affirm their cultural heritage. We now have that choice. In the African view of our life, it is our responsibility to honor their name. This is perhaps our moment of truth. We must come together as a family. We must do all that we can to uplift our people. Otherwise, we are still denying who we are and bringing dishonor to our family name, to our ancestors. The answer to our social dilemma is the resocialization of our people into the cultural value systems that affirm our spiritual being. Our ancestors are calling us home, back to our cultural selves. We must begin this process of Sankofa. To Be African by Asa G. Hilliard III. To be African or not to be, that is truly the fundamental question. Slavery, colonization, segregation, apartheid, and the ideology of white supremacy have been and are systematic ways of assault on African people from hundreds of years ago to the present. The descendants of Africans all over the world are like the punch-drunk boxer who has been hit by everything, including the ring posts. He does not know where he is. He may not know that he is still in the fight. He cannot protect himself from further attack. He cannot see clearly. He may not even know where his own corner of the ring is. He moves almost on instinct alone. He falls. He is not down for the full knockout count. He has a reserve. He holds on to his opponent in order to gain some time to clear his head, to renew his strength. He gradually regains clarity. Strength returns to his weary limbs. Suddenly, he strikes out. He is victorious. Most Africans do not really understand what we were doing when we came under attack from outside the continent. We do not know how the attack was conducted or why. We remember some of the brutal images, but not the most devastating ones. The truly devastating ones were silent and invisible. They were the enslavement and colonization of our minds. Our memory has not been restored. Our vision about things are still blurred. We are still struggling to get back into the fight. The physical pain and emotional hurt went beyond measure, but it was the mental assault and the resultant disorientation and loss of consciousness that disabled us most. Our deepest relationships, our social bonds, our solidarity with our African family were deliberate targets for our oppressors. They knew that alone we were vulnerable, but that together we were invincible. They did take their jobs seriously, extremely well. They designed a system to make us lose the very basis of our collective identity. Things that glued us together were attacked mercilessly in very calculated, systematic, and sophisticated ways. Our cultural names, our understanding of God, our language, our stories, our proverbs, our worldview, anything that bound us together was crushed. In their place, our oppressor demanded that thou shall have no other God before me. This, of course, meant that that the oppressor was to be our God. As Dr. John Henry Clark said so often, they even colonized the image of the deity. For slavery, colonization, segregation/apartheid, and the ideology of white supremacy to work, they had to destroy our independence at all costs. Then they had to make us believe in, protect, and even demand white supremacy. Some of us believed more strongly in white supremacy than Europeans did themselves. We had to be taught to love Europe more than life itself, consciously and unconsciously. We have drifted so far, we do not know what we left behind or its value to us today, even today. And so you can see that the restoration of our collective memory is a revolutionary act of liberation. It is the solid ground upon which we can build economic and political power and return to a sense of purpose and destiny. To recover the practice of our cultural forms, our values, our worldview is an act that challenges the very foundation of any form of oppression. So it is something that we must do if we are to exist in order to build our own world on the foundation laid by our elders. No, we do not have to give up television, telephones, physics, etc. in order to build our own world on the firm foundation laid by our elders. These are things that we have helped to create. Now, as horrible as our Mafa, terror and disaster has been and still is, it is not the real reason for our turn to and use of our culture. of our own culture. Even if there had been no MAFA, no colonization, slavery, segregation slash apartheid, or white supremacy ideology, the final question would be the same for us: to be African or not to be. We cannot fashion a valid ethnic identity merely out of a response to terror and oppression. We certainly must fight and deal with oppression, but our work is far from complete with that. The decision to be African is a decision about membership in and commitment to a global family. Our family is a family that carries thousands of years of history and culture, a history and culture that is second to none, a history and culture that still lives on the African continent and abroad in the diaspora. We do not know and do not have to We do not know and have not remembered these things. For our great-grandparents, grandparents, and so on, for our ancestors and our brothers, sisters, and our children yet to be born, we must claim them and build a world for them. We must claim our heritage as our base for solving problems collectively, not as individuals. We must put ourselves in charge of ourselves. We must pick ourselves up, knit ourselves back together again, and revivify. Damn, I was on a roll, low key. Dang, I hate when that happens. Let's look it up. Revivify. To give new energy and strength to an event or an activity. Revivify ourselves. No one else sees a bright future for us. No one else will guarantee that it comes to be. We are at a fork in the road. Many people of African descent have chosen to try to do it alone or try to become members of someone else's ethnic family through integration and assimilation to alien aims and authority. They are still our brothers and sisters. They have a right to choose the path that they think is best for themselves. For me to abandon African identity, even if the years have dimmed our memory of it and our perspectives about it, is to choose to abandon the fruits of the labors of our ancestors and to leave the family as our source of nurture. It is to choose not to be, not to exist. The love and pride and bond that I feel for our African family is no more intense than the respect that I feel for other non-African families, and even admiration for them if they're non-hegemonic. Yet I cannot really respect others unless I love us. Money and political power are basic to our struggle. There are those who believe that we must start there. Some say that the cultural matters will have to wait. Some even argue that the solution to our problem is to forget culture and to organize our social class. Money and political power are definitely important. However, a real-world look reveals that money, political power, and culture cannot be separated. It is a matter of both and not either or. In fact, there are not now, nor have there ever been, any non-cultural or a-cultural group who accumulated wealth and power. Notice how the real world is configured ethnically. We are not only we are not only at a fork in the road, we may be at the last moment in time when we can still marshal our forces, regroup, teach ourselves the things that we need to know, create a reunion and a resurrection of our family. The farther that we move from our cultural source, the weaker we will become. To be African or not to be, that is truly the question. It is round 15 of a 15-round fight. Are we really overwhelmed? Do we really want to win? Do we believe that we can take charge of ourselves? Do we even have the will to do so? Can we say to our ancestors, I am because we are, and because we are, therefore I am? Can we change from being adjectives to a proper name like everyone else in the world? Can we abandon colored, Negro, at-risk, minority, diverse, the poor, and the oppressed, and just be African with all of the responsibility that being a family member requires? There really is no other viable choice. To Be African by Wade W. Nobles. In the critically acclaimed and equally critical flawed BBC documentary Africans in America, the nation was informed by the first African child born in America was named William Tucker. He was born in 1624. While attempting to describe the events and evolution of chattel slavery in America, the documentary tries to give the viewer a first-hand account of this American experience by taking excerpts from the autobiography of Aluda Equano. Aluda Equano. The film shares Aluda's personal account of his enslavement and freedom by introducing him as a kidnapped African who becomes British and marries a British wife, in quotations. In the actual writing of his autobiography, Aluda completes his saga by signing his book as Aluda, an Enslaved African. This brief commentary on the BBC documentary helps us to see several important points. The first point, which is substantiated by the necessity to pass the 14th Amendment in the U.S. Constitution, is that each and every African American today, like Aluda, is technically only an American by the location of our birth, and secondly, by the act of law which makes us citizens. Do you ever think about that? Do you ever think about that? Like, take those amendments away, who are we in this nation? Anyways. Who or what is being located and whose citizenship had to be ratified into law is African. The second important observation of this documentary is that while the myth makers want us to believe that the Africans, along with our culture and spirit, somehow were mysteriously transformed into something other than African, the authentic voice of Aluda recognizes that he remains an African, albeit an enslaved African. The essential issue to note in this regard is that neither time, circumstance, conditions of cruelty and oppression, nor adopted legal status change us from being African. In effect, we are all William Tuckers. We are all Equanos. Equanos. Equuianos. Let's look up that word. BBL July. Oop. Oh, I spelled that wrong. Oh, that's his name. Girl. See, sometimes I need to slow down. But I want to see. Oh, okay. That's just how his name. That's his last name. Let's see how it's pronounced. Oh, okay. I want to see. Girl, my fault. That's his last name. Sorry. I just thought. It's okay. We are Africans whose birthplace locates us in America. We are, in many respects, especially mentally, still enslaved Africans. It has, in fact, been the African in us that has been the constant, although disrespected, unrecognized, and most often misunderstood aspect of our strength and humanity. Hence, politically, economically, socially, historically, and most of all, psychologically, it is important that we understand what it means to be African. To Be Afrikan, in the book Souls of Black Folk by Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois, made the classic and prophetic observation that the problem for the 20th century was the problem of the color line. Dr. Du Bois went on to identify the double consciousness of the Negro, in parentheses SIC, S-I-C, which consisted of two warring ideals, one American and one Negro, errata African, whose dogged strength alone keeps us from being torn asunder. Dr. Du Bois's observation is fundamental in two distinct ways. Firstly, it directs our attention to the African essence whose dogged strength keeps us from being torn asunder. To be African, as we enter the new millennium, it is paramount paramount that we return to, revisit, and recast Dr. Du Bois's prophetic observations. In returning to Dr. Du Bois's observation, we should now recognize that the problem in America was not simply a color line. The problem in America, from the colonial times to the present, was and has been what to do. The problem in America from the colonial times to the present was and has been what to do with the African. In America, there has been and remains a deep psychological fear of black people, African people, a fear of pathological proportions, resulting in an almost complete obsession with the question, what shall be done with the African? The historical and ongoing answer to this seemingly perplexing question was to de-Africanize the African. Oh, oh, oh. Sorry, keep going. The objective was simply to make African American people ashamed of being black and African, and ultimately to convince us that our very humanity was connected to our declaration that we are not African at all. It was, however, black people's response to the experience of de-Africanization or dehumanization that Du Bois noted, acknowledged, and, in a sense, celebrated as the dogged strength. This dogged strength, which refused to be torn asunder, was, I would argue, our racial instinct to refuse to be de-Africanized. In revisiting Dr. Du Bois's observation, we must now claim the responsibility for seeing ourselves in the world as African people. We must speak to our own spiritual truths and claim our own special meaning as human beings. Our meaning can no longer be in reaction to second-class citizenship or to the racist illusion of white people or to our own inner fear of being who we really are, i.e., African. Finally, in recasting Du Bois's edict, 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 I believe the task of the next millennium for African American people is to be authentically African, and in so doing, create time, place, and space on the stage of humanity's future. Ours is to be African by understanding the African spirit, which keeps us from being torn asunder. In fact, our fundamental task as we enter the next millennium is to address the dual challenge of our existential problematic. By that I mean we must simultaneously resist our de-Africanization, in parentheses, deculturation, while we retain our sense of Africanity, African spirit, in parentheses, in a non-African, or more correctly, an anti-African environment. At the most fundamental level of human existence, this essential problematic translates to our urgent need to heal the rupture, to extend the splendor of our African spirit. To be African possesses the collective question of how to do I hate that. It's because I'm reading too fast before my mouth can speak. Possesses the collective question of how do we heal our race and, as healthy, authentic human beings, become the caretakers of the black human family and the new world, human in parentheses, and the new world order for the next millennium. To be African, while appearing awesome, if not audacious, this charge simply means that we have a profound and deep responsibility to understand what makes us human and what kind of geopolitical, socio-cultural reality is necessary to support and advance our human possibility, probability, and potential. Ours is not the small, limited question of citizenship and civil rights. To be African requires that we as a people address the expanded and more fundamental question of our human authenticity. This is a critical concern because worldwide white supremacy is not simply a system of segregation, discrimination, and disenfranchisement. Worldwide white supremacy was and is the philosophical and ideological foundation for implementing the systematic and systemic negation and nullification of the humanity of African people throughout the world. This negation and nullification is the singular and sole goal of the Mafa. The Mafa, as noted by Marimba Ayani, is a Kai Swahili word for disaster. For many, it equates African enslavement with the Jewish Holocaust. Such comparisons are erroneous. The Mafa is a continual, constant, complete, and total system of human negation and nullification. Fundamentally, the Mafa is the denial of the validity of African people's humanity, accompanied by a collective and ever-present total disregard and disrespect for the African and people of African ancestry's right to exist. It gives license to the continual perpetuation of a total systematic and organized process of spiritual and physical destruction of African people both individually and collectively. Hence, we cannot be lulled into believing that the oppression, discrimination, and dehumanization of African American people is a past history, ending with the passage of the civil rights legislation. Our past in America is prologue for the future unless we seize the authority and authorship of the definition and meaning of our collective well-being. Our essential humanity is at stake. We be African. However, to be African in an anti-African society requires that we seize control of all the instruments that determine the lived experience and quality of life of our people. As a campaign to be African clarifies and refocuses our human imperative. Can we heal the race? My answer is unequivocally yes. Not only is the answer yes, but the expanded implication of the question translates to the ultimate recognition that the real issue for us to be African or not, us is to be African or not to be. The psychological liberation of the African mind and the worldwide development of African people, including African American people, require no less than that we as a people take responsibility for defining, maintaining, and controlling every institution that influences and or impacts the agency of African people. While I believe the destructive consequence of the current path is clear and predictable, i.e., disease, pain, death, poverty, unemployment, miseducation, dehumanization, etc., I still invite the reader to open the question to discussion, debate, and critique. Can Black professional agencies, political organizations, fraternal and sororal orders, and religious institutions confront and eradicate the systems of de-Africanization and de-spiritualization of African people without addressing the question of to be African? Can we create a society that maximizes the human possibility and potential of our children without addressing what it means to be African? Can we provide education, social services, economic development, healthcare, political power, and ultimately even our connection to the divine without understanding the Africanness which defines our essential humanity and well-being? I believe not. We as a people must take charge of the systems of socialization and education of our people. As a collective effort towards a common destiny, we must come together and create the programs and processes that will provide the information, skills, beliefs, and values that will guarantee the development of our children and the permanent advancement of our people. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. believed that while he personally might not get to the promised land, his beloved Black people would be triumphant and get to the promised land. I believe that the promised land for the beloved will be found in the recognition of our Africanity. There we go. And while some of us, like Martin King, may not get there, we as a people will get there, and our eyes shall see the glory of the coming of the Lord. We African American people can get to the mountaintop, and we can build by our own wit and wisdom a new world order where we can understand and express what it means to be African. We can heal the rupture and extend the splendor that this we must see. This we must do for ourselves, our children, and our ancestors. We can be African. We be African. To be African.